Hey, Nick here. Welcome back. You're continuing the dramatic reading of The Return of the Indian, the second book of the Indian in the Cupboard series by Lynne Read Banks. And we are on chapter 19, The Terror of Battle. From the dark heart of the fear, Omri heard a new sound. He could see nothing now, but through the snapping of the flames, which were already licking at him, came a sudden deafening rattle. Then isolated bangs, nearer and nearer. With no other warning, something exploded almost under him. The teepee crashed to its side. Remember, Omri has traveled back to wherever Little Bear and Bright Stars has come from, and he's traveled back and transformed into the teepee that they used to travel back to their time. So Omri's stuck in the teepee as the village is being raided by the Algonquins, and they set the teepee on fire. So it's a race against time. See if Omri will be rescued back into his normal reality in Great Britain, where he went into that chest with the magic key. Will Patrick let him out in time? Let's see what happens. So the teepee crashed onto its side. Omri felt it on top of him because he's the painting of the beaver. The fire noise stopped, and so did the smoke, though the smell was still there. The falling teepee had put the flames out. Whew. There was a sensation of heaviness, then of threshing, and he could hear Boone's rich cursing as he struggled to get out of the crumpled, half-burnt folds of the tent. Boone traveled back with them as he was tending to Bright Stars. In his struggles, he turned the whole thing over. Now Omri was staring up at the night sky. He could see the stars with smoke drifting close above him and the reflection of the central bonfire on a few pine tops. A cowboy boot loomed for a second against the starlight and came down, narrowly missing Omri. Boone stood above him, astride him, firing into the surrounding darkness. Once, twice. "Take that, you flea-bitten coyote!" he yelled. Then a click. Omri found he had been counting. That was the sixth and last bullet. The rattle came again, closer, and Boone flung himself down on the fallen teepee. On Omri. Omri could smell his sweat now, feel how his heart was thundering through his shirt, hear him muttering a mixture of curses and prayers. The machine gun bullets whizzed overhead. There was a numbing crash of another hand grenade exploding somewhere near the big fire. Now, to the noise of explosions were added shrieks and screams of terror, and other shouts, war cries, as Little Bear's men descended from ambush onto the hapless Algonquins. Omri heard the thunder of a single pair of hooves drumming on the ground beneath him. Boone rolled aside, and at almost the same moment the stars were blotted out as the pony cleared teepee, Boone and all in a wild leap. As the pony cleared teepee, Boone and all in a wild leap. How about that? As it galloped on, Omri caught a glimpse of Little Bear on its back, waving a rifle above his head, riding down 3 fleeing Algonquins. The noise of the firing was now continuous and deafening. Omri could see the flash of large and small explosions in the dark. The tide of battle swept to and fro chaotically. Twice or 3 times, small groups of Indians, whether friends or enemies, Omri couldn't tell, raced across the fallen tent. One tripped over Boone and went flying. His bare foot scraped Omri's face. It was the nightmare to end nightmares. Utterly powerless, unable to move or escape or fight back or even close his eyes and ears, Omri had long since stopped hoping that some miracle would save him. He had totally forgotten Patrick, forgotten his other life. He was a helpless witness to the chaos and carnage of war. He was a part of it, yet not a part of it. It seemed it would go on forever, or until some kind of oblivion engulfed him. Then, in the 10th part of a second, it ended. The noise, the smoke, the cries, the terror, the helplessness, gone. Silence. He lay curled up in the darkness on something hard. He could feel his body, his wonderful, 3-dimensional body. Light fell on him and warm air, and he heard Patrick's voice, with panic in it, calling his name. He lifted himself slowly. His hand clutched the edge of the chest. The other went to the right side of his face. Patrick was staring at him, aghast, as if he saw a stranger. God, Omri, are you all right? Omri didn't answer. The side of his head felt funny. He took his hand away, and some black stuff was on his fingers. Something was odd about his nose, too. He felt something running out of it. He looked down. There was blood on his sweatshirt. What happened? What's happened to you? Your nose is bleeding. And your hair. None of that mattered. The blood and the singed and blackened hair meant nothing. They didn't give him any pain or any fear, at least none that he could call fear now. Stiffly, Omri crawled out of the chest, trying to get his mind back together, to clear it and to adjust. Patrick was babbling something about Omri's mother. She just came in, and I couldn't do anything. She made me go downstairs to the phone, and then she wouldn't let me go back up again. She just kept asking where you were. She delayed me. I was going crazy. She wouldn't let me go. Omri, I'm sorry. You look terrible, as if you'd nearly been killed or something. What happened? Is it over? Should we bring the others back? Omri had a pad of something pressed to his nose. His head, where the fire had licked, was beginning to sting. It was awfully hard to think. He remembered what Boone had said about Little Bear and kept repeating to himself, "Poor critter's had a shock. Poor critter." The poor creature was himself. The others. He turned suddenly. "Get Boone back," he shouted. "Not the others. Get Boone. Hurry." Patrick snatched up the plastic teepee and Boone's figure from under it. "Don't forget his hat," Omri said idiotically. Patrick scrabbled about in the earth of the seed tray and almost threw it after the figure in the tent. He slammed down the lid of the chest and turned the key. "If only he's not dead," breathed Omri. His head was beginning to ache piercingly from the burnt side. Patrick threw up the lid again. They looked down into the belly of the chest. The teepee was a crumpled wreck, twisted and blackened. Boone lay on top of it. He was very still. For one horrible moment, Omri thought that a stray bullet or blast from an explosion must have killed him. But then he raised his head and looked up at him. "Is it over?" he called. "It's over for us, Boone," said Omri. Gently, he lifted him out. "Was you there, too?" "Where was you, son?" "You were lying on me part of the time," said Omri. Boone didn't try to puzzle this out. "Dang me if it wasn't the most fearsomest thing that I ever been through in my entire life." "Me too," said Omri soberly. Patrick was staring at him. "Have I missed it?" he said. "Is it over?" "I don't know," said Omri. With a sudden movement, Patrick leapt into the chest. "What are you doing?" cried Omri, although he knew. "Send me back. I've missed everything, and you've seen it. Send me back." "No. You've got to. It's only fair." "Never mind fair. You don't know what you're talking about. It was... Never mind that you missed it. You're lucky." "But it's no use. I wouldn't send you now for £1,000,000. Remember, they're in Great Britain, so this is the British pound. Patrick saw he meant it, and when he looked at Omri's face, brave as he was, he couldn't really be sorry. He climbed slowly out again. "Tell me about everything," he said. Omri told him, with Boone chipping in. Boone had accounted for 3, possibly 4 Indians before he ran plumb out of bullets. "You better do something about that burn," Patrick said at the end. "Yeah. What, though?" "You're going to have to let your mum see it sometime." "How will I explain it? And my nosebleed?" Patrick said the nosebleed was nothing. We could have had a fight. The burn was the problem. Half the hair on that side of his head was gone, and there was a big red blister. "Well, you don't have to worry about explaining that now," said Patrick. "They've gone out." "Who?" "Your lot. Your parents and your brothers." "Is the babysitter here?" "Not yet. She's late. Can you cope till morning?" Omri didn't know. He supposed so. He was ashamed to admit how his heart had sunk when Patrick said his mother wasn't in the house. He suddenly wanted her. He wanted to tell her everything and let her take care of it. And him. Well, he couldn't. That was all. Just as well, perhaps. Boone, exhausted, flopped down in the longhouse for a sleep. after flinging back the last of the whiskey. Go figure, Boone. Patrick and Omri slipped down to the next floor bathroom and found some ointment, which Omri rubbed on his own head. The sight of himself in the mirror scared him silly. His face was white, red, and black. He felt he could be doing with some whiskey himself, but he made do with an aspirin. Good, because you shouldn't drink if you're underage. What about the others? Asked Patrick. I don't know. Omri felt the whole thing had gone well beyond his control. Having seen Boone, Little Bear, and Bright Star's full size, he could no longer think of them in the same way. Some part of him, until the battle, had still thought of them as his. Not toys exactly, but belonging to him, within his orbit. This illusion was now gone. What was happening back in the village? Whatever it was, he was responsible for it. He couldn't avoid the realization that he had sent devastating, modern weapons back in time and that they had certainly killed people. Baddies, of course, but who were baddies? If Patrick, a year ago, had made him a present of some other plastic Indian, it might just as well have been an Algonquin, and then the Iroquois would have been the baddies. Suddenly, Omri felt the nightmare was not there, but here. I think we should bring them back, said Patrick. Bring them back if you want to, said Omri, who suddenly felt tired to death. I've got to sleep. He started back up the stairs to his room and stopped. Not up there. He wanted neutral ground. He turned and went down again. Where are you going? Asked Patrick. Down to the living room. I'm going to sleep on the sofa. What when the babysitter comes? Shove her in the breakfast room. He stopped and met Patrick's eyes. Don't do anything stupid, he said. I really can't cope with any more. I'll take care of everything, said Patrick. Omri went on, his feet like lead weights. In the living room, he didn't even put the light on. He just threw himself onto the sofa, where in 2 minutes, he was fast asleep. 20. Let's continue on with Invasion. He slept without dreams for 2 hours. Then something woke him. He lifted his head sharply. His mother hadn't closed the curtains, so a little light came in from the street. He felt strange, but he saw at once where he was, remembered why he was there. He was by no means ready to wake up. So, why had he? Then he saw there was somebody in the room. Coming in, rather, through an open window, facing the front garden, which shouldn't have been open. It was the sound of it opening and the draft of cold night air which had awakened him. He was peering over the arm of the sofa, which lay in deep shadow at the farthest end of the living room. He could see the clear silhouette of a male figure stealthily putting first one leg and then the other over the sill and ducking his head under the half-raised window frame. A bare head, which gleamed dully in the diffused lamplight from beyond the high front hedge. For a second, Omri thought it was an Algonquin, but there was no scalp lock on that shaven skull. It was a skinhead. Remember those bullies that he had remembered from the arcade down the street, up to no good. No, not just one. Once in, the figure bent and beckoned, and from the shadows appeared another, and then another. One by one, they climbed silently into Omri's house. In a flash, he remembered last night. Was it only last night? When he'd come down to fetch Bright Stars something to eat. He'd seen a hairless head go past the kitchen window and then put it out of his mind. They must have been looking the place over, casing the joint, making plans for a time when the family would be out. Where was the babysitter? Normally she would be in here, watching television, but the set sat darkling in its corner. The intruders made towards it, laid hands on it, while one unplugged it and rolled up the cord. The other two lifted it between them. Would they try to take it out the window? No. They carried it silently to the door. The cord holder opened it, and they went out. Omri swung his legs swiftly to the floor and stood up, holding his breath. His heartbeat was extraordinarily steady. In fact, he felt calm and clear-headed. There was another door to the living room, and it was the one nearest the foot of the stairs. Moving across the carpet without a sound, he slipped out of the room and glanced towards the front door. It was open. The skinheads were going down the path, but they weren't yet ready to make off. They put the television down in the front garden just behind the hedge. Omri knew they would then turn and come back for more. He took 2 swift steps to the stairs and then raced up them silently, 2 at a time. He must phone the police. No, he couldn't. The only phone was in the hall. Remember, this book was written in the 80s, and for those of you who grew up during that time, it's not that phones were everywhere. Although one phone in the house, I mean, come on. The only phone was in the hall. He must do something. He couldn't just let them get away with it. It was bad enough they made his life a hell in Hovel Road without invading his territory. But the inescapable fact was that they were years older than Omri. There were 3 of them, and they probably had knives. He reached his attic bedroom out of breath and opened the door as quietly as he could. He stopped. It was full of strange small lights and flickering shadows. The first thing he saw was Patrick, fast asleep on cushions on the floor. Then he noticed that the cupboard had been returned to the top of the chest, and so had the seed tray. There seemed to be a lot of activity going on its much trampled earth surface. Omri moved forward to look closer. An astonishing scene met his eyes. The ruined longhouse had been turned into a sort of scratch hospital. Clean pages, evidently torn from a notebook, had been laid on the floor. In a double row, with a walkway between their feet, lay a number of wounded Indians. They appeared to have been well looked after. The ones Omri could see, through the holes in the longhouse roof, were bandaged and covered with warm blankets made of squares cut from Omri's sports socks. He recognized the green and blue stripes on the white toweling. Bright Stars was there, her baby tied to her back, moving among them with a bucket, giving them drinks. At either end of the building burned a small fire of matchsticks and shavings of candle wax, which each tended by an unwounded Indian. Around the fires, wrapped in glove-finger sacks, more braves lay asleep. Omri's eyes went to a bright light at one end of the seed tray. The stub of the candle had been stuck to the earth and lit. Around it, muttering and chanting, Little Bear moved in a slow sort of dance. His shadow, hugely enlarged, was flung all over the walls of Omri's room, and the thin, weird, wailing note of his chant struck Omri's heart with sadness. And here is Little Bear doing that dance, mourning the loss of his warriors. Near the candle, well, I'm assuming that's what he's doing. Near the candle was the paddock. It was like a graveyard. Laid out on the grass were some small, still shapes, covered with squares of white cotton blotted with drops of red. Omri counted them. There were 8. 8 out of 40. And all those injured. How? When they had ambushed the unsuspecting enemy with far superior weapons. I was kind of wondering the same thing. It took only a few seconds for Omri to take all this in. Then, out of the depths of the longhouse, bustled a little figure in blue and white, with a tall, flowing cap. I think you know who this is. "Well," she exclaimed when she saw him, "here's a nice how you do. Call this a casualty ward? I'd rather be Florence Nightingale. She had it easy. Whoever let these poor simple fools loose with modern weapons ought to be shot themselves." "What happened?" asked Omri, dry-mouthed. "What was bound to happen? They were shooting each other. From what I can make out from their leader, they encircled the enemy, then blasted from all sides, never realizing how far the bullets would travel. The shots didn't hit an enemy. The shots that didn't hit an enemy were likely to hit an ally coming the other way. I fished so many bullets out tonight, I could do it with my eyes shut." She bustled back to work, tutting loudly. Omri bent and shook Patrick awake. "Get up. We've got burglars downstairs." I almost forgot about them with this whole scene that they described. Patrick jerked upright. "What?" "Skinheads. 3 of them. They must think the house is empty. They're going to clean us out. Only they're not, because we're going to stop them." "We are? How?" "Where are the guns the Indians had?" They're in the cupboard. I think they've damaged a lot of them. We were mad. Where's the bag of British soldiers we had in the garden? Here, but you're not going. And where's Fickets? He's in with them. Omri was frantically emptying the paper bag onto the chest. He found Fickets at once and almost threw him into the cupboard, remembering just in time to take the jumble of rifles, Tommy guns, and machine guns out first. He locked and unlocked the door, and in the next moment Fickets was standing bewildered by the pile of guns. "Corporal, check those weapons." Fickets, rubbing his eyes at once, came to attention and then began disentangling what now appeared to be a pile of scrap. Omri, meanwhile, was putting handfuls of soldiers recklessly into the cupboard. Patrick was at his shoulder. "You're crazy. You're always telling me not to—" "Shut up and bring me something flat." "Like what?" Omri turned on him fiercely. "Use your head. Anything. A tray. A book. My loose leaf will do. Be quick." Patrick did as he was told. Omri closed the cupboard, but didn't turn the key. "Corporal." "Yes, sir?" "How much ammo is left?" "Ammo, sir?" "More like how many working weapons. Them redskins have wreaked havoc, sir. Absolute havoc. I was afraid of this, sir. This here's a precision instrument, sir. They're not bloomin' bows and arrows." "Never mind that now. I'm going to put you in charge of an operation, Fickets." "Me, sir?" "Not Indians this time. British troops. And they're going to mount an attack on 3 people my size." "God help us, sir. How can we?" "Just do as I tell you, Corporal, and make them do as you tell them, okay?" Fickets gulped noisily, then straightened himself. "As long as most of them are Marines, sir, I expect we shall manage." "Good man. Stand by to reassure them as they come out." "No need for mollycoddling them, sir. The light's poor. I'll just tell them we're on night maneuvers." Omri turned the key in the lock and opened the door at once. He was glad the light of the room was dim. Patrick thrust Omri's large, flat, loose-leaf book in front of the cupboard, and out onto it poured 20 or 30 tiny khaki-clad figures. Some of them still had their weapons. Others, obeying Ficket's barking orders, began to man some of those the Indians had used, the room filled with metallic sounds of weapons being loaded. "Shall we use the big guns this time, sir? Now we've got the crews," Fickets asked Omri aside. "Yes, marshal them all on here, and tell the men to prepare for an all-out attack when you give the word." "No trouble, sir. Just don't, he coughed. "Don't thrust yourself forward, sir. They haven't spotted anything unusual yet, if you take my meaning." Patrick had caught the spirit of the thing and was feverishly sorting out every bit of hardware he could find in the biscuit tin and getting the cupboard and key to work on it. Soon the men, who were armed with light arms, machine guns, portable anti-tank rockets, and even a bunker buster, a Milan missile, were in position, drawn up on 3 sides of a square with their backs to Omri. Though this was a formidable array, Omri did not feel even the faintest scruple. "Fickets," he whispered, "I'm going to transport you all. When you see your targets, give the order to fire at will." "Sir!" saluting. "And don't worry, nobody's going to get hurt." "You hope," muttered Patrick as they started down the darkened stairs. Shall we go on? Why not? Chapter 21. Getting towards the end here. The Battle of the Skinheads. They moved silently down through the darkness. Omri could feel through his hands, holding the edges of the loose-leaf platform, the faint vibrations of life. He could also, for the first time since it happened, feel the sting where the row of minute bullets had pierced the skin of his palm. On the first landing, he nudged Patrick to a stop. Low down on the bottom flight of the stairs was one which always creaked. He heard it creak now. He changed directions and slipped through the half-open door into the bathroom. He and Patrick stood behind this door. There was another door to this room, which led into his parents' bedroom, and it, too, was ajar. They saw a faint light, the sort made by a pen light, feeling its way about on the landing, and heard the stealthy sounds of skid heads following it. Then a faint whisper. "Let's try in here." The finger of light vanished to appear again through the other door. The intruders were in Omri's parents' room. He could hear them moving furtively about. Then the soft whine of a wardrobe opening. Gah, no fur coats. Omri and Patrick stood rooted, hardly breathing. Omri was almost praying that, in the darkness, no soldier would press a trigger by mistake. Suddenly, the torchlight was within 2 feet of them on the other side of the door. Can't wait to see what's going to happen. Look here, Kev. Omri set his teeth. He knew what they'd found. The little oak chest with small, shallow drawers in which his mother kept the few bits of jewelry she owned. Most of it old silver, inherited from her mother. It was very precious to her, though it wasn't especially valuable. Omri heard the scrape of wooden drawers, and then, "We can flog this lot. Let's just take the whole thing." And then another voice, farther away but audible because they thought they were safe and were getting careless. "Here, I'm going to take a leak on their bed." There was a burst of stifled sniggering. That did it. Before Omri could even signal, Patrick had let out a growl of disgust and flung the door open. "The light switch, beside you!" Omri shouted. There was an agonizing second while Patrick groped. Then the top light came on, flooding the bedroom with brightness. The skinheads froze in grotesque positions, like children playing statues. Their ugly faces were turned toward the boys, their eyes popping, their loose mouths gaping. Omri rushed in like an avenging fury and stopped, the loose-leaf platform with its contingent of men thrust out in front of him. "Hey, what the hell?" Then Fickett's sergeant major voice rang shrill and clear. "Fire at will!" The biggest skinhead snarled and made a dive towards Omri. For a split second he loomed menacingly. Then there was a concerted burst of fire, and suddenly tiny red spots appeared on his face in a line. From the bottom of one cheek, diagonally across his nose to the top of the other. He stopped, dead in his tracks, and let out a howl of pain and outrage, and clapped his hands to his face. "I've been stung! It's hornets! Get 'em off of me!" Behind him, his mate started towards Patrick, hands reaching out to grab. "I'll get 'em, little nerds." But all he got was the miniature equivalent of an armor-piercing shell up his upper thumbnail. "Ow!" he shrieked and let out a string of curses, shaking his hand and dancing in agony. The third and smallest of the gang had been gazing at the object Omri held, and he, unlike the others, had seen. He now let out a sound that started as a moan and ended in a scream. "Ah!" He then flew into a panic, dashing here and there in short spurts, yelling, "Help! They're alive! I seen 'em! They're alive!" Then the crump and crack and chatter of guns which were firing. Through the crump and crack and chatter of guns which were firing continuously. The other two also turned to flee, but all sense of direction had deserted them. They bumped into the furniture, the walls, and each other, swearing and howling, and giving great leaps into the air every time they were hit in a sensitive spot. Omri and Patrick added to the uproar by shouting encouragement to their little men. Patrick was jumping about as if at a prize fight or a football match. Omri had to stay still to hold the firing platform steady, but he opened his throat on a long shout of excitement as the three invaders finally found the other exit and fled through it pell-mell. "Cease fire!" cried Patrick. "Cease fire!" bawled Fickett's. There was a fraction of a second's silence. Then the boys heard the skinheads shoving and swearing on the stairs. One of them tripped. There was a series of satisfying thumps, and then a loud crack as one of the banisters broke. The boys, hurrying down to the half-landing, saw them fleeing along the path and heard the clatter of their boots receding along Hovel Road, accompanied by sounds of anguish. The boys turned and hugged each other. "We did it! We did it! The way you switched the light on, terrific! How could you hold that thing straight? I'd have tipped them all off. I was so excited. Hey, where is it?" "I put it on the bed." They rushed back into the bedroom. Fickett's was calmly ordering the men to clear up and cover the big guns. When he noticed the boys, he left the men and edged to the back of the platform. "Operation's a success, sir?" he asked in a quiet tone. "Definitely, Fickett's. Well done," said Omri. "Did I say a sergeant, Fickett's?" said Patrick. "I meant a captain." "Not me, sir. Too much responsibility," he coughed. "Better get the men fell in and back to quarters as quick as possible, sir." "Yeah, right," said Patrick. "Thanks again, Corporal." It was terrific. And he started to carry them upstairs. See that everything's all right up there, said Omri. Okay. Patrick reached the door and stopped. I don't mind so much now, missing the other battle, he said. Wasn't this one fantastic? Yeah, said Omri. He was thinking how fantastic it was, too, that he would never be afraid to walk down Hovel Road again. They would leave him severely alone from now on. And even if they didn't, having sent them flying like that, and after all he'd been through tonight, he couldn't imagine them holding any terrors for him in the future. He looked around the room. He was going to have a bit of explaining to do. The glass on a picture was cracked. There were a number of pinholes, some larger ones, and in the wallpaper and in the foot of the bed. Then there was the banister, and his own injuries. Well, he could tell his parents about the burglars, say there was a scuffle. Maybe they'd believe it. He hoped so. He bent and picked his mother's jewel box up off of its face. He saved that for her, anyway. Under it was a cheap pen light. He picked it up. It was still lit. He switched it off and dropped it into his pocket. He might, if he felt like it, just hand it back to that little skinhead if he bumped into him after school on Monday. It'd be a good laugh to see his face. When he drew a deep breath of satisfaction and went downstairs to bring in the stuff piled in the front garden. We'll continue to the end. This last section is called Epilogue by the Fire. When everything was back in place, with Patrick's help, except the banister rail, which needed gluing in 3 places, they made some hot chocolate to take upstairs with some cold potatoes and other leftovers. They were both so keyed up they couldn't feel their tiredness and prepared to sit up all night. I sent Matron back for some drugs and stuff she wanted, Patrick said, but she made me promise I'd get her again in the morning. She says she's going to take a week's leave from St. Thomas. She's enjoyed all this anyway. Fickets, too. Little Bear hasn't enjoyed it. Omri didn't answer. Every time he thought of the Indian battle, it took away from his overwhelming pleasure in the one with the skinheads. Where's Boone? He asked suddenly. I sent him back, too. He asked me to. Said the odd gunfight and saloon brawl would be a rest cure after all he's been through. He said he'd like to see us soon, when things have quieted down. What about his horse? Oh, yes, I gave him the one that English cavalry officer was riding, Patrick chuckled. You should have heard him swear when I flicked him off. Boone was really pleased. Said she's a beaut. Really, he was happy with it. And I bet the horse'll be happier with him than with that snooty redcoat. When they reached the room, all was quiet. The candle had burnt out, so Little Bear had to stop his dancing and chanting for the dead. One fire was out, the other was burning low. The Indians, including the wounded, were all asleep, except Little Bear, who sat cross-legged by the fire. Bright Stars was asleep beside him, the baby in the crook of her arm. Patrick struck a match, and Little Bear looked up. We've brought food, Omri said. No eat, said the Indian. Omri didn't press him. He just poured a toothpaste cap full of hot chocolate and put it beside him with a piece of potato. The match went out. They sat together in the dark, with just the embers of the fire. The boys drank their chocolate. For a long time, nobody spoke. Then Little Bear said, Why Omri bring Little Bear? For the first time in 2 days, Omri thought of his prize. It had gone completely from his mind. Now it seemed so trivial, he had won that essay contest. He was ashamed to mention it. Something good happened to me, which was partly to do with you, and I wanted to tell you about it. What good thing happened? I wrote a story about you and Boone, and it was good. Omri write truth of Little Bear? Yes, it was all true. Omri write Little Bear kill own people? Of course not. You write before this happens. Next time, write Little Bear kill own braves. You didn't. The Now Guns killed them. You couldn't know. Then Little Bear fool, came his bitter voice out of the dark. There was a silence. Then Patrick said, We were the fools, not you. Yes, said Omri. We should have known better. We shouldn't have interfered. Interfere? Omri not afraid. We shouldn't have let you alone. We should have let you alone. Let alone Little Bear die from French gun. There was a pause. Then Omri said, You did beat the Algonquins. Yes, beat Algonquin thief, not beat French. Yeah, that was a pity, said Patrick feelingly, after all that. Fewer dead the better. Fewer dead the better, muttered Omri. Good kill French, Little Bear exclaimed, sounding more like his old self. Kill French next time. But not with the now guns. After a silence, Little Bear said, Now guns good. Shoot far. Now Little Bear no shoot far. Next time not put own braves where bullets go. Omri's give now guns. Take back. The embers of the fire flared a little. Bright Stars had risen to throw on another curl of wax. Now she crouched beside Little Bear and looked into his face. No, she said clearly. He looked at her. What no? She spoke to him softly and earnestly in their own language. He scowled in the firelight. What does she say, Little Bear? Wife say, not use now guns. Soon braves forget skill with bow. Woman not want son grow up without Indian skill. She say now gun kill too many, too easy, no honor for chief or chief's son. What do you think? Omri give now guns if Little Bear think good? Omri shook his head. Then what for I fight with wife? Give wife own way. Peace in Longhouse. Till next enemy come. Then maybe wife sorry. He scowled at her. She smiled, bent down, and picked up the baby and laid it in his arms. He sat looking down at it. What's his name? Omri asked. Name must mean much, mused Little Bear. What Omri mean? Omri was a king in the old days. Omri name for big chief? Omri nodded. Then Little Bear named son too for chief. For father, Little Bear, had first horse in all tribe. Call him Tall Bear. He sat high on horse, more high than all brave. Suddenly he clutched the baby to his chest and turned his face upward with closed eyes as if bearing a strong pain. When sun grow, Little Bear tell that Omri write story. Little Bear live in story even when gone to ancestors. That give honor, makes son proud of father. He'll be proud of you, Little Bear, without any help from me. Little Bear looked up at him. Then he stood up. The fire put out a sudden flare. He stood there, feet apart, his body glowing, his stern face for once untroubled. Omri good, he said loudly. Give Orenda back to Little Bear. Orenda, the life force. And then he held his son up high in both hands as if offering him to the future. Little Bear doing that. And that is the end. Thank you. You guys made it. How about that? Thank you for reading with me. Hope you enjoyed it. You can check out some of my other playlists as I read through The Hatchet. So I've read The Eyes of the Dragon and do a couple other books. I started doing this for my kids so that they could hear me read to them even when if I wasn't around or just like not in the mood to read. They could have it on demand, but I'm just really glad I've shared it out here on YouTube and that you folks have been enjoying it, and your comments and people subscribing have kind of spurred me on to continue on with the project. So I appreciate that. And I hope you will subscribe if you haven't already, and drop me a comment. All right, take care, and we'll see you on the next book here for the Dramatic Readings.